right, these are my old apartments. It's kind of cool to see them. I spent a lot of time living here and jogging. I had a mountain bike when I lived here. I bought a little car not too far from here at a transmission store. And it was like a cash car. And I could get back and forth in Fort Worth. But this is Euless. And I wrote 3 major books here. One of the books that I wrote here was called The Untitled. Okay, and I published that one on Fiction Press. Another book that I wrote here was The Thieves' Story. It's about 3 major characters. There's 3 protagonists, and it's 3 separate stories. I wrote that book here. It's very long. It's close to 5, 6, 700 pages. The Untitled, I think, is the same, like 600 or 700 pages. I also wrote several plays here. I did a lot of reading. I did a lot of reading of the great masterpieces from Camus, even a little bit of Kafka. I read a lot of different material. I even just read the crap out of this one Zoetropa, Francis Ford Coppola's literary magazine. I did a lot of reading of that here too. I studied a lot of literature and stuff here. This is kind of where I schooled myself in literature, was in these apartments. They're actually called Camden Oasis apartments. I named the character, believe it or not, in Escape from Maine, Samuel. It was John. The Escape from Maine character is Jonah Samuel Camden III. It wasn't necessarily based on these apartments, but it was based on a bank that was in Maine at the time, near Dover Foxcroft. And Camden that name came to me again. Now it's like, hey, I used to live in Camden Oasis. These are now called Crest Oasis. But Camden Oasis was what these apartments were called. And I mean, I struggled here. This is where I also ran my first marathon. I ran 25 or 26 miles from one zip code to another zip code when I lived here. I jogged almost like every day. I lived over these like crazy people they were like Yankees. I don't know if they were drug dealers or whatever the hell. They used to meet people in this racquetball court. They have a indoor racquetball court here, and they would meet people there. So I'm sure they were probably dealing. They lived underneath me. One time, actually, they were playing such loud rap music that I dropped this big weight on the ground to shut them up, and they came up to my door, started banging on my door, like trying to get in. So I called the police, and the police came and met with me. Now, when I went down, when I went out to do my laundry, the guy came out with a knife. He had a knife. This is a true story. He had a knife in his hand, but his hand was open. So he had the knife in his hand, just like James Dean, but the hand was open. So the cop asked me, he said, well, when he pulled the knife out, he pulled a knife on me. He said, how was he holding the knife? Because he showed the knife to me. And I showed him, his hand was open and the knife was laying there. He said, was a stabbing motion? So they didn't do anything. I think it was I don't know what, what kind of cop it was. But they didn't do anything. And I had to live here for I think it was a total of 2 years. And I also studied at UTA etymology. So I studied to be a teacher. I studied etymology and pedagogy. Well, I didn't really study etymology. I studied etymology, it's just the history of words. But I technically studied basically secondary education, pedagogy. It was pedagogy courses at UTA, how to be a teacher, basically. And Earl, who was a teacher for many years, was the PE coach. He didn't allow me to do it. When I moved to Fort Worth, I was finishing up the last 2 courses, and I left here. I have this crazy story about a Nutri-Grain bar. Actually, I ran from the clerks at the grocery store over a Nutri-Grain bar, over a 50-cent Nutri-Grain bar, and they actually freaking called the police. And I think the police were wise enough to know not to go after somebody over a Nutri-Grain bar. But it was a 50-cent Nutri-Grain bar that I had stuck in my pocket because I kind of halfway forgot it was even there. I bought a bunch of ramen noodle, and I was running out of room. I didn't have like one of those little small carts. So I put the Nutri-Grain bar in my pocket, and the guy confronted me on it, so he got all crazy and grabbed my bag and ripped my bag. Like they were like going crazy, and ripped my bag off my shoulder. And then my mountain bike was at this Albertsons. It was like a $250 mountain bike, and I had to leave it there and run. And it was like, oh brother, where art thou? And the cops had come down this one alleyway, and I hid in the bushes, and they did the whole spotlight thing, you know. And I was in the bushes, and I was wearing this brown coat, so it was kind of somewhat camouflage, and they just passed on by. That was good de-escalation, by the way, Popo. That night, because I think they I don't know if they saw me or not, but that's an example of de-escalation. They probably saw me, but the crime was over 50 cents. It's still, they could have done something, but whether they saw me or not, I'll never know to this day. And I kept going. And I leaped over this fence and went through his backyard, dog barking, all raised in Arizona style. And I ran and I ran and I ran, and I ran across this field, and lo and behold, there was this big flag, behold. And the flag said Jesus. It was a white flag with red letters that said Jesus. And I thought, what a message from God. Because I got away. And I was writing like crazy here. Finally, I left about a month early, before the end of my lease and everything. It was about a month early, and I finally made it back to Fort Worth, and that was all the first steps that led to me marrying Sarah, my first wife, because the next thing you know, Danny Whitworth, Johnny Whitworth's brother, Johnny Whitworth's kind of like a movie star in Hollywood. Danny took me over for the night, and then my sister had got me a place in Crowley, and she was married at the time. He was now the chief of police of Crowley, to Kit, who was a police officer, and they helped me get back on my feet, and I met a bunch of police officers and stuff like that. So I don't really disagree with the police. A lot of this is for the filmmakers, and we can hate a character, we can hate Herby, but the police, this is probably an important post, the police are there to serve. They are there to protect. I'm not saying that every police officer out there are right, but out of 1,000 police officers, you know, maybe 1 or 2 are corrupt. I don't know. Hey man, I'm gonna tell you this. There are corrupt police officers. I mean, we've got films like Brooklyn Finest. We've got films like Training Day, Denzel Washington did, and everything. So we know that there are probably some bad cops out there. But we have to put our trust in something. We have to have order, you know. And when something goes wrong, I mean, we need a brother sometimes to be there for us, or we can act as our own big brother at times. And a lot of times they want us to. I mean, we have the right to protect ourselves. I got to find this person. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is that I did a lot of writing here, and I really love this place. I also did some theater too. I worked out at Sage and Silo Theater and Hip Pocket Theater and things like that, and helped out in different places. But this was a great place. I lived here. This was a great training ground for me on my own. I had to do a lot of crazy stuff. I was on a mountain bike for a while. I had to take the train to Dallas. I waited tables at Puerto Rama, right over by Neiman Marcus in Dallas. And I lived here for quite a bit of time. It was wonderful. I've written, like, I think 2 or 3 books here. Escape from Maine, of course, I wrote that in Maine. But this was one of the big places that I used to write. I used this area, this complex, to write in.